Listen to a conversation between a student and an employee in the campus computer center.
Hi, what can I help you with today?
Hi. I wanted to, you see, the thing is, I don't know much about computers. So I was wondering if there's a class or something, so I can learn how to use computers, like to write papers for my classes.
Oh, I see. We don't really offer a course for beginners since most students already have computing experience. But all the computers in our labs have a general tutorial installed on them. You could just go there and run it.
And the tutorial explains everything? I mean, it might sound strange, but I've never used a computer.
Well, all the computer labs on campus are staffed with student assistants, and I'm sure that any one of them would be more than willing to get you started.
Yeah? Well, that sounds good. But is it expensive?
No, in fact, it won't cost anything. It's one of the services of the computer center.
That's great. How do I get in touch with the student assistants? Should I just go to a computer lab and ask whoever's there?
Sure, you could do that. Or I can let you have a list of names of the students who are assistants in the labs. You might know one of them.
Actually, I think I'd prefer someone I don't know, so I can ask dumb questions. Is there anyone you'd recommend?
All of our student assistants are really knowledgeable about computers. I mean, they have to be, in order to work in the computer labs. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily good at teaching beginners, but you probably won't be a beginner for very long.
I hope not.
And I just thought of something else. The bookstore has a lot of books on computers. There might be one for people like you. I mean, people who don't have a lot of experience with computers. I actually bought one for my father so he could learn how to use email, basic word processing, that sort of thing, and it worked pretty well for him.
Okay, I'll try that too. And if the bookstore doesn't have it, they can just order it for me?
Right. Now, is there anything else I can help you with today?
Just a list of names and the times they're working. I'd like to get going on this as soon as possible.
Right. Good luck.
Listen to part of a lecture in an economics class.
When attempting to understand international trade, some things seem so obvious that they can hardly be controverted, and other points that are important are invisible unless you've thought about the subject carefully. Consider the following. If there's an increase in imports, let's say imports of furniture, and the domestic producers of furniture find this new competition very difficult and are cutting production and employment, then it seems obvious and easy to understand, and many people conclude from this, that increasing imports will cause generally greater unemployment at home. What is not so obvious is that how much we import and how much we export, those are interdependent, and you can't understand the one without the other. But the exports that are generated are not easily discernible, so most people don't see them. They see only the imports of furniture rising and employment in domestic furniture production falling. So as a result, many people argue that we ought to protect jobs by limiting imports, either by tariffs, quotas, regulations, or whatever, without realizing that this also has the effect of reducing potential future exports to the rest of the world, things that we can produce very, very cost-effectively and therefore profitably. The fundamental proposition in international economics is that it makes sense to import those things that can be produced more economically abroad than at home, and export things to the rest of the world that we can produce more cost-effectively than produced elsewhere in the world. Therefore, if we limit imports, we put ourselves in danger of not being able to export. The details of this relationship will take much longer to explain than I can fully go into now, but the point of the matter is that gains, the benefits of gains from international trade, result from being able to get things cheaper by buying them abroad than you can make them at home. Now, there are some things that we can make at home that we can do more economically than they can do abroad. In the case of the United States, typically high technology products are things that Americans have innovated in and started firms doing that sort of thing, at which they do very well. Whereas goods that use a lot of relatively low skill labor, like furniture production, cotton production, sugar production, those are things that are frequently made more inexpensively in places where wage rates are low and the cost of using capital is very high. However, in Florida, they produce a lot of sugar, but the costs are so high, if we didn't have extensive restrictions on imports of sugar, the output of sugar would decline dramatically. But the sugar industry in the U.S. doesn't produce high-paying jobs. It uses resources in ineffective ways, and it blocks the import of more cost-effectively produced sugar. It's a very bad bargain for the people in the United States to want to protect low-paying jobs, thereby halting the growth of world trading and more international specialization. It would be better to remove restrictions on imports and allow other countries in the world, countries that can produce them more cheaply, let them specialize in producing those products. Now, I agree that people who are directly affected by imports, what they focus on is that their job prospects are being reduced and their economic circumstances are getting worse. And that's a relevant problem and an important problem. What isn't so obvious is that by retraining and relocating people to places and industries where jobs are expanding rather than contracting, we can make the whole economy function more effectively and productively than by trying to block imports. What is interesting to note is that even if there were no international trade issues like imports, any changes that occur in a country's economy, any new technology, change in preferences, change in regulations, or whatever, will lead to adjustments that lead some sectors of the economy to decline and others to expand. And that's what we have to figure out. And that's a hard problem to deal with in detail, is how to facilitate people adjusting from sectors where their job prospects are not so good, and in particular where real wages aren't so high, to acquire skills that will permit them to move into higher paying jobs in other parts of the economy, either by retraining or relocating. And helping pay for the relocation of these people would be very helpful. But trying to block the changes is really counterproductive. It makes people in our country poorer, and it makes people elsewhere in the world poorer as well.
Listen to part of a lecture in a marine biology class.
I want to continue our discussion about whales. Specifically today, I want to talk about whale migration. Why whales head south for the winter? Or really, why whales in the cold water of the northern hemisphere head south for the winter? Now, not all kinds of whales migrate, but most baleen whales do. And interestingly enough, we still don't really know why the baleen whales migrate. We do have several theories, however, which I'll discuss today. Can anybody name one reason why baleen whales might migrate south to the warm tropical water?
For food? The whales move to warmer water in order to find a good area to feed?
Good guess. That should be an obvious reason. After all, most animals that migrate do so for the purpose of finding food. But, that doesn't seem to be the case with baleen whales. To understand why, you need to know something about water temperature. There are a lot of technical reasons that I'm not going to go into right now. But let's just say that nutrients don't rise to the surface of tropical water like they do in other kinds of water. Tropical water simply never gets cold enough. So, what this means is that tropical water doesn't have much of the plankton that most whales feed on.
I don't understand. If there's no plankton, how do the whales survive through the winter?
Right. How do they survive? You see, they don't have to eat anything because they've stored up so much fat during the summer feeding season that they can just survive off of that. So if they don't need to eat anything, we're back to our original question. Why do baleen whales migrate? Any theories? No? Well, there's one idea out there that a lot of people believe. In fact, you could say it's the most popular theory we have about whale migration. Basically, the argument is that for baleen whales, migration is a kind of balancing act. Let me explain. On one hand, whales need to take advantage of the summer months by eating as much food as they can. And that's what they can do best in the northern seas. This allows them to build up a lot of fat. But in the winter, food is scarce, even in the north. So what the whales need to do is save energy. And that's what migrating south can help them do. Amanda, you have a question?
Yes. The balancing act theory doesn't make sense to me. Maybe whales might need to save energy during the winter, but wouldn't moving all the way down to the tropics make them lose energy?
That's a good point. And it's one reason why this isn't a perfect theory. It does cost the whales energy to migrate, but it's easier for whales to save energy in warm water than it is to save energy in cold water. So there might still be, a good reason to move south for the winter, okay? Now, before moving on to the next chapter, I want to briefly discuss how the baleen whale manages to navigate. It's pretty remarkable because the whales manage to return to the same places year after year and have to travel over an enormous area of ocean in order to do it. I mean, it's not like whales can just look at a map, right? So, exactly how do they do it? Well, a lot of experimental work still needs to be done, but we have been able to figure out at least 3 ways the baleen whale navigates without getting lost. The first is the ability to use Earth's magnetic field like it was a map. That sounds strange, but we know that many birds use that method, use the magnetic field, and it's possible that whales have the biological ability to do the same thing. Another theory is that if they stay close to the coast, whales might be able to find familiar landmarks and use those as guides. But we don't really know if a whale's eyesight is good enough to be able to do that. So that's not a perfect theory. And finally, we know that many whales make very loud sounds that can travel literally hundreds of miles underwater. Through a process called echolocation, it's possible that these whales hear the sounds bounce off of islands or other pieces of land and use those echoes as clues to help them find their way.
Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
To understand why, you need to know something about water temperature. There are a lot of technical reasons that I'm not going to go into right now. But let's just say that nutrients don't rise to the surface of tropical water like they do in other kinds of water.
What does the professor mean when she says this?
There are a lot of technical reasons that I'm not going to go into right now.
Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
It's pretty remarkable because the whales manage to return to the same places year after year and have to travel over an enormous area of ocean in order to do it. I mean, it's not like whales can just look at a map, right?
What point does the professor make when she says this?
I mean, it's not like whales can just look at a map, right?